All right, Kelly, thanks so much. I want to bring in now retired U.S. Air Force Special Operations Commander Major Glenn Ignazio, who has spent time in Ukraine during the war, and Don Jensen, Director of Russia and Europe at the United States Institute of Peace. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us tonight. Don, I'd like to start with you. Thus far, support among Russians has been pretty strong for the war. Looking at those images today, looking at those Google searches, how to break your own arm, it looks like it's changing.
It's most certainly is. His base support has been the far-right patriots, almost toward fascists, but that big middle ground of about 50% of the Russian population, which was content to have a good life in Moscow, content to ignore the war, and they can no longer do that. So his political base is shrinking, and who's to say, and I doubt, that he can ever put it back together again.
Glenn, American intelligence intercepts show that Russian generals in the field are now arguing each other, that Putin himself is getting orders directly to generals in Ukraine. There's a dramatic turnover in the field. One commander in charge of Kharkiv was ousted after just 15 days on the job. That's a picture of chaos.
Yes, absolutely. And the leadership is completely fragmented. I mean, they've lost a lot of generals in combat where the Ukrainians have taken them out. Putin has actually fired many of the generals. And when you have that experience and you have that vacuum, you have these people that don't have the experience in Ukraine. They don't have leadership experience, whoever he decides to place into power. So, yes, it has been very fragmented. The losses have been significant. And now you're basically seeing, a draft which is hitting mainland Russia, and they're starting to wake up to the actual problem in Ukraine.
Yeah, a draft, Glenn, of 300,000 reservists and veterans who probably are not well trained and well equipped. And we've had reports for months now of poor morale and desertions among Russian soldiers, and these penalties of up to 10 years in prison if they're caught doing that. Do you think these desertions will continue?
Yes, absolutely. We're seeing people in Ukraine itself. You're seeing Russian officers and enlisted completely abandoning their posts and running. You've seen a lot of people become public that were in the actual conflict. So, yes, the whole idea that you're going to have people that are maybe 2 weeks trained. I mean, in the beginning, you had conscripts and some fairly well-trained Russian troops, and they were devastated. Now you're going to have people with maybe a couple of weeks training that haven't fought maybe in years. And the interesting part, if you want to look at history, is, Putin now starting to call shots. There was a guy with a little mustache that fired all of his generals and started calling the shots. We know what happened to that in World War II. So it's a crazy situation unfolding in Russia itself.
Right. Students of World War II know that was when it really turned, is when Hitler started messing around and giving the orders himself instead of leaving it to his generals. Don, I want to ask you about something else. A Russian pop star with 3.5 million followers on social media has also gone very public this week, slamming Putin and the war effort. Does that matter, too? I mean, she's definitely a social influencer and has a lot of clout inside Russia.
Well, Elizabeth, that matters a heck of a lot. Alla Pugacheva is a pop star, sort of like Frank Sinatra. You might imagine her that way. And who is her constituency? The older Russians, 50 and above, Russians who have traditionally been very strong for Putin. So when she comes out and says that, defends her husband, who's in trouble with the authorities, this is a big deal. This is a big deal. Kept thinking the other day, remember, You're Too Young, Walter Cronkite coming out against the Vietnam War. That kind of stirring of the mix, that kind of shaking up the complacency inside the Kremlin, I think it's going to make a big difference.
Yeah, I'm not too young. I remember Walter Cronkite, but thank you for that compliment. Don, tomorrow begins the 5 days of voting on this referendum in these 4 provinces in Ukraine. This has widely been dismissed by the entire world as a sham. Putin is the only one who's saying it's legitimate. How long will it take for Putin to declare what we all know he'll do, which is victory? And then what happens next?
Well, I think what he's going to do is declare those part of the Russian Federation. There's been rumor of my Moscow contacts, perhaps on his birthday in October, he's going to say it's Russia and then say, well, it's Russia, so our doctrine says we can defend Russia with nuclear weapons. Whether he does that is unclear. But the problem is this is not Crimea in 2014. The hold of Russia in some of these places, Kherson, for example, is very, very shaky. Russians have already been leaving even there. So can he make it part of the Russian Federation? Well, he can say it. Does that mean it's really part of it? I doubt it.
One last question, Glenn. You were in Ukraine. You have a lot of experience in this. These new revelations of war crimes committed by Russian troops is really astounding.
Yes, and honestly, I wouldn't say that they're new. I mean, I have seen this for many months. I mean, I was in Bucha, and being a military aviator, I looked at every one of these targets. I saw maybe one military target, and I saw dozens after dozens of attacks on apartment buildings, homes. I didn't see military targets, and to me, I was personally upset because I thought this was indiscriminate killing. I've seen the use of the cluster bombs. I've seen just absolutely indiscriminate force being used against civilians. So it's even worse in Kharkiv, and Bucha was really bad. So the mass graves and everything, it's horrendous. I can't even explain unless you see it.
All right. Well, very important information from both of you. Glenn Ignazio, Don Jensen, thank you so much for being here tonight and lending us your expertise.
Thank you.